Welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. We are just one day away from the new SBFL season. Celtic take on Ross County tomorrow morning at 12:30. I hope you all have your PJs on, have a carrot out for Brendan Rodgers coming during the night, and I hope you're all going to be very excited for the season going ahead. Alan Morrison, I know you're excited.
Yeah, always. I don't know what's going to come into my bedroom now.
Well, maybe it might be Jico
But
James.
carrot will be at the ready.
My heavens, that would be quite the sight.
How are we doing? We excited?
Very much so. It's funny how it feels like such a long season intra, and then by that first week in June, you already start to get antsy as far as getting it started again. So yeah, it's always good to get to this point.
I feel wholly underprepared for this season ahead. I just the anticipation of it, I don't know what to anticipate, so therefore I'm just kind of going with it, hoping that the first game gets off to a winning start and then figure it out as we go along. I think that's what most people are doing as well, because even with preseason, under Ange, you could almost tell what was happening. Under Brendan Rodgers, like I genuinely don't know who is going to be at the club, who's going to be playing where. Could Liam Scales be starting? Could Starfelt be out the door? Could Kyogo be playing in midfield? I just don't know what the starting lineup is going to be against Ross County tomorrow, but we're going to be looking ahead to that game on today's podcast. We're also going to be looking at the starting 11, the transfer window, and the season ahead as a whole. So, Alan, I'll throw this to you first. Are there going to be many surprises on the starting team sheet tomorrow, in your opinion?
I could make a case for there being quite a few, um, and I think it may well come down to, um, risk. Risk. It always comes down to risk, and how many changes does the manager have the appetite to make that are putting his imprint on the team, given that he's had his time to assess players, and versus how disruptive do you feel you can be to what was a settled team last season? And I think most of the uncertainty is probably in defence, mainly due to injury, and we don't really know what state after. I mean, Carter Vickers has had half a game, Nawrocki's had half a game, Ralston's had half a game, etc. So we don't really know to what extent those players are truly game ready. On the other hand, it's Ross County at home. It'll be, there are 4 games into their season full of the joys of early season, etc. And I'm sure they'll be well up for it. But I could make a case for quite a radical back five. Um, you know, the Wolves game was a real eye opener for me in terms of the extent to which Joe Hart has deteriorated physically. His reaction times, his speed out to the ball was so slow, and his passing was all over the place. He looked bereft of confidence, as well as he just looked older. I'm not trying to be dramatic. It was just my honest assessment is um, he looked like he'd aged considerably over the summer, and that we know that this is coming. Um, and he didn't play against Athletic. So, I would not be surprised if one of the other two goalkeepers starts. Now, I wouldn't know which one it would be, Segrist or Bain, but I strongly suspect one of those could start. I could make a case for saying that Iwata would start at right back. Um, he was pretty solid. I know he had the one error, but in terms of having a ball playing midfielder as your fullback, I think that might appeal to Rodgers. If Carter Vickers is match fit, he'll play. There's no doubt about that. And with rumours circulating around Starfelt, if Narovski's up to match fitness, I think he'll start. And then at left back, if I'm being brutally honest, if I was picking it on form, I'd pick Bernabe. And also, I think Bernabe's more of a Rodgers type of player. Now, that's all very kind of radical to where we were last season. Um, I don't think he'll. I think out of all of those, I think they're possible. I don't think he'll play Bernabei. I think it'll be too much change, and Taylor will be seen as a safer bet. But Taylor's form in pre-season has been really poor, in my opinion. So that could be another area. And again, I think Bernabei looks to me more of a Rodgers type of fullback. So I could make a case for quite a radically different back five. And then in midfield, would you be shocked if Turnbull started over Hatate? I wouldn't be. On the evidence of the last couple of games, that wouldn't be a shock to me. I think the only part of the team that I think is nailed on is the front three and McGregor and probably O'Reilly. But I think outside of that, you could have quite a debate as to who you think is going to play, and that's what makes it very interesting.
Well, interesting is the word. We'll start with the back five, let's say, or back four. I don't want to go too deep into the hard conversation because we've had that multiple times now, and I think most Celtic fans will be in agreement that that's somewhere that hopefully there might be an incoming coming in before the end of the transfer window. So let's focus on the defenders. We'll start with Starfelt because there are rumors today, James, that Carl Starfelt could be leaving the club depending on who the suitors are, what the money is coming in from him. Celtic aren't really that light in terms of bodies when it comes to centre back. They've got Welsh, they've got Navrosky, they've got Kobayashi, and then Cameron Carter-Vickers. So if Starfelt is leaving the club, it's not going to be before tomorrow. So my opinion is, based upon what Rodgers has been saying about Ralston and Cameron Carter-Vickers, he basically said that they're both back and they're both relatively fit. They're both in a better position than they thought they would be, but they're still not fully there. My idea for tomorrow is that Celtic are going to start with Nawrocki and Starfelt, which is a brand new partnership and one that we might only see once this season.
I tell you what, man, you guys, I'm my niche on this show is to be the crazy American radical who brings in, stupid American sports analogies and that kind of stuff. And you guys are blowing me away with this stuff. I mean, I'm going to have to take up my game as far as radical ideas and propositions. I mean, this is whoa. Some of the stuff you guys just said, I hadn't even considered or spent any time thinking about. So I think Carter Vickers, as long as, and again, I think the context of who we're playing and that it's Flag Day and it's at home against, Ross County, who generally do not, in the pendulum of domestic opponents who should bunker, they tend not to bunker as severely under Mackay. And so again, they're still going to play defensively, but generally they tend not to be as compact, that kind of thing. So this is the kind of game where we should really dominate. And so I think that's part of the calibration here, at least I would think. So as long as Carter Vickers is, this is not going to be a taxing 90 minutes for guys coming back, particularly at the center back position, I would think. Coming back from a long-term injury like he is, and the fact that he did put a half in against a good quality opponent, and he seemed to be, I mean, he was flying around doing tackles and stuff. So, hopefully he's ready to go. So that I'm swatting that away, Enda. Get the hell out of here with that idea. So as far as Starfelt goes, I mean, my thinking is if he's pipelined to go, and again, there's talks about with his relationship and proximity of where his lady friend is living and playing now and that kind of stuff, that it wouldn't be shocking that somebody in his position, given his age, if he can get a bigger contract down south, again, that wouldn't be a shocking decision that a player might want to make at his career point. So I'm not sure why against Ross County at home you don't play Nawrocki. Again, my Polish, you guys with your linguistic talent.
Nawrocki.
Nawrocki. So that's as good as my Korean and Japanese. Is I would just go with him. Now, I'm not saying there aren't risks with all of this stuff. There obviously are. But based off of what you guys are saying, like we're at that point where there's so much kind of weird fluidity here. I think reasonable people can throw a lot of stuff against the wall here, and it probably isn't crazy. Like there's a lot of reasonable variation here that could take place. Ralston coming back, the fullback position being a more demanding one, even against the Ross County, than center back. So I could see that calibration being a little bit different than Carter Vickers. I hadn't thought about the idea of dropping Hart, to be honest with you. I just kind of dead set in the way Alan put it. I mean, I don't disagree with anything that he analyzed. I'm just hadn't thought about that. I mean, that's part of why I think that there might be a big signing coming in at some point at the keeper position. At least I'm hoping. I mean, if he's going to drop Hart, I can't imagine it's going to be for Segrist, because he's even worse with his feet than Hart is probably. So I'm thinking, I mean, again, what's the response? I'm not saying it's the wrong decision, even from Rogers' perspective, but if Scott Bain is the starting keeper tomorrow, Twitter's going to be quite the enjoyable, interesting place. So yeah, dropping Hatate would be an incredible decision. Again, the way he's played, and the change in system and that kind of stuff, it wouldn't shock me if that decision were made from an analytical perspective, but from the politics of transition as a new manager here, that would be quite the decision to make as well. So these would all kind of blow my doors off if they happen.
Yeah, I'll tag Brendan Rodgers in some of those tweets, and maybe if he's thinking of bringing in someone for Hatate,
we have to find his. We have to find his burner account. That's our next project.
What kind of got my spidey senses tingling was the fact that Hatate was superb in those games in Japan. He was really exceptional. It looked like he had pushed on. It looked like he was taking on more responsibility. He just the way that he was taking the ball on the half turn, driving the team forward, getting the ball forward quickly, I thought was excellent. And then suddenly in the last two games, it's just like fallen off a cliff. And
how much of that, Alan,
it reminded me.
I'm sorry, because I apologize for interrupting, but I think it's germane to what you're talking about, because his role, from what I've been able to ascertain, even looking at the dopey Y Scout stuff, is it looks like he was positioned very differently, and I even did a little thread on Twitter about it, meaning that in Japan he was playing almost like the deepest midfielder role, almost like the old Scott Brown role of collecting the ball and being the focal point of transition out from the back four, almost like the Greg Taylor inverted fullback role under Ange. It's kind of like the analogy I drew. Whereas he was almost a 10, or like more in the advanced box-to-box role in these more recent games. So I just wanted to, is that also what you kind of perceived, Alan, and when you looked at the games, and then how much do you think that implicates relative to this issue, as far as, because he did, I mean, he obviously had a couple of his brilliant moments, but yeah, some really, really awful ones too. So I was wondering what you thought about.
I think in the Japanese games, my perception was he was more of a slightly double pivot, like you say, a little bit deeper, and I thought he was exceptional in that role. Against Wolves, he was more and against Bilbao, he's more of the classic sort of number 8 in Ange's system, the sort of left of the three, if you like. The thing, the two sort of takeaways I had from the Wolves game, apart from I was almost jaw dropping how slow Hart was and getting out to situations, was that the Wolves just attacked our left hand side. They just went down that side again and again and again, and it was the sight of McGregor, Hatate, and Taylor trying to rugby tackle guys, because they were just getting run past by more athletic players. And McGregor's going to play, right? So there's no doubt about that. But I just think, I mean, if I could see that, I'm absolutely convinced an elite coach like Rodgers can see both of those things. And against Bilbao, it was, I mean, his goal was exceptional. It was a brilliant goal. That was like one of those wonderful moments. But how many times did he give the ball away in central areas near goal in that first half? Was it 3, 4, 5? I can't. It was a lot, but it just looked like a player. It just reminded me of. I always remember. I think we in Rodgers' first season, and I think we played, ironically enough, Leicester City in a friendly game, and I think we were between Champions League matches, and Johansson played, and Stefan Johansson played, and I remember at the time thinking, I don't think I've ever seen a professional football player put less into a performance than what he did that day. I know it was only a friendly, but then 3 days later he got sold to Fulham, and it all kind of made sense. And I just Itate's is the difference between his performances in Japan, which looked switched on, mature, like he'd really pushed on as a player, taking responsibility, fantastic, to those last two. I can't explain. It was like night and day. So I'm kind of speculating, but I don't know if there's something else going on there, or whether it's just the normal vagaries of pre-season, and I'm looking far too deeply into this. But again, I was being a little bit controversial when I was talking about who should play tomorrow in the spirit of, if I
Right.
was looking at this from let's look at the pre-season games and let's pick the team on form, never mind all the other considerations about balance and, you know, disruption and relationships and all that sort of stuff, then that's what I would potentially. I think you could make a case for it, but
Mhm.
I did think it was, I thought it was remarkable, as in worthy of remark, the difference in quality of performances between those Japan games and those last two games. Even
Can
though I
I
get
off?
it's preseason, I get that. I get that.
Yeah. Can I offer up a very boring, mundane potential reason for that?
Mm,
Tiredness.
mm,
Traveled from Japan to Ireland to Scotland to Ireland back to Scotland. Not
mm.
ideal, like I
Fair
know they
enough.
had
Yeah.
games organized in Korea, which would have made things easier, but I'd imagine it would have been easy on the players. And obviously, everyone else did that, so you'd expect to see it, but maybe it just affected him more. Who knows? Who knows?
Mm,
It might be something that you're suggesting, but in terms of David Turnbull himself, I
mm,
mean, Rogers was very keen on making sure he praised David Turnbull after the games, especially the one on Tuesday. He said that he's had a very good preseason. He was excellent in Japan. He likes him as a footballer. He's got the tools. He's comfortable on the ball. He can score goals. And the one thing he said about him is that he needs to just keep working and keep on the move. So he doesn't want him, trotting around the field as
Right.
David Turnbull tends to do sometimes, which is sort of the opposite of what Hatate does sometimes. Sometimes you want Hatate just to stop, slow down, look at what's happening around him rather than just buzzing around the place, which he tends to do quite a bit. Before we move off the midfield, because I think it's sort of related, I do like Iwata as a right back, just in the system that has Burnaby as the left back, though, because I think if Burnaby's bombing forward the way he does, Iwata slots in nicely into the central midfield or the center of the fence to form a back three or
They
form.
call that the
Um,
Lustig.
yeah, the Lustig way. Yeah, exactly. He didn't have the legs to get forward anymore, so he just played as a centre back most of the time. But also it also frees up Hatate, if he's the number 8, to get wide in the midfield, and Iwata can slot in as the double pivot alongside Cal McGregor. So I mean that might be fanciful thinking, but that's why I like him. I think he's very versatile and can do multiple roles, which is why Ange brought him to the club in the first place. So I would definitely start Iwata as a right back over Ralston, given his fitness, given his versatility, and just overall form, as you say, Alan. I thought he was excellent in preseason.
Yeah,
No, fair enough. I mean, sorry, James. Go on.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the point about width is an important one in terms of looking at that right back spot, because what Ralston does give you, he does give you good width. He does like to attack the line, and especially with Abada in front of you, I think Rogers is going to like having effectively three strikers. Is his front three? I think they're all three. I personally think there's three strikers. Two of them may play in a wide position, but essentially, what that then means is you need someone to give you that width. If they're coming inside and finding space in the box, which I think all three of them are really good at, then you need someone to provide that, which Iwata do, but Ralston will. So that I think that's a good point. Well made, really. But then again, that comes back to the left back area. Who's going to give you that width on the left hand side? And Hatate could do that for sure. He does like to pull wide, but not to get to the byline, more to then feed the ball in from interesting angles.
Yeah. So the other aspect of this, and again, this is where it's different relative to playing, let's say at Aberdeen. Was that next week? I think we go to Aberdeen already, and certainly in the Champions League, where this is where I'm probably less alarmed with Hatate because of it. It looks like there was a little bit of experimentation going on with Rodgers. So, for example, when I did my dopey benchmarking thing with Holm, when we signed him, I noted that he looked like he had the profile maybe of a number 10. I mean, very skilled. His decision making metrics looked to be very strong, very talented on the ball. Even absent his awesome YouTube videos of juggling and that kind of stuff. He hadn't had really any minutes of significance in that role in his career up to that point. He'd almost universally been in a defensive midfield role, or maybe as a box to box, not really in that number 10 role. And he did get deployed that way by Rodgers. I forget which game it was, but I specifically, made a mental note. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like he was playing in the O'Reilly role, or the old Tom Rogic role of being, that kind of classic number 10. So I wonder how much of this, because again, Hatate was almost populating that space. I mean, Wisecout even had him as a second striker at points in the two games recently. So I think some of this has to do with experimentation, and that leads to the fascinating part of this, which we've talked about already since Rodgers' return, which is him being a far more kind of fluid tactician and how he's going to deploy players. So my guess is one of the two, or maybe even both, Bernabé and Ralston. I suspect it'll be. I'd be surprised if it's Taylor and Awada, because I agree with Alan. Like that would be an interesting, kind of odd, almost iteration. Not that it'll be that meaningful against Ross County at home, but this issue of width, I'd agree with, and I think the other issue on a look forward basis, as I hinted at with like an Aberdeen at Pittodrie or in the Champions League, is this kind of deep playmaking passer hitting long balls to these three strikers that are populating the front, that are all adept at getting in behind. And that we've talked about this the last two seasons, even under Ange, that they've made all these runs and they very rarely get hit with any kind of adept long passing. And that's where I find the potential transition of Hatate into that deepest role. I think that suits him a lot from a go forward basis. There's all this other issues about sloppiness and passing potentially, and positional awareness, that he gets caught on the ball. And, I think all that stuff is valid concerns, and I think he can get better at it, hopefully. But this ability of him to play these long balls that McGregor's, hasn't been his strength historically, he might get better at it under Rodgers as well, potentially. He certainly has the technical skills to get better at it. One would think. And that, so setting up with those two kind of wide center backs, the two sitting midfielders, kind of, deep orchestrating, so to speak, with the fullbacks overlapping. Both of them I could even see against Ross County. And more of like a, 4-6. It won't be like that, but that's kind of how I've been thinking about it. But what you guys have been saying would be, fascinating. So I've been thinking more McGregor or Tate, like they were in Japan, with probably O'Reilly as the 10, with at least one fullback, maybe both bombing on, with the three forwards, doing what they do, which again is quite exciting.
Mm-hmm. Do we foresee it being anything other than a traditional sort of 4-3-3 general shape? Because
I don't see 4-3-3. I don't see it.
Okay.
I don't think we have the midfielders to play that the way Rodgers would want it. We don't have the the horses, the pace and power guys that I think he would want to populate those kind of roles. That's my interpretation of it, anyway.
Well, I guess that sort of answers one question, but what I was sort of leading into is the idea of playing a double pivot against Ross County. Celtic don't need a second defensive ship in terms of the midfield against Ross County. They're going to be playing in their half most of the time. So how do we foresee it looking on the pitch as a general shape, even though we're all in agreement that, you know, formations are just shapes that the team sort of looks like. It's not necessarily always what it is wedded to. So interesting to get your text on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think whatever you call it, whether it's 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3, the objective will be to find space in the opposition box and get the ball into players in dangerous positions, right? And it's really the difference between Postecoglou and Rodgers will be the method in which they use to do that. So I'm not too hung up on what you want to call that really in terms of a formation. I think we'll have 4 nominal defenders, but how you utilize the fullbacks to try and create attacking possibilities will be interesting, and how you use the 3 midfielders to supplement the 3 forwards will be interesting. What shape that ends up looking like James said, it could be like a 4-6, it could be a 2-3-5, like Postecoglou's ended up being as an attacking shape, or variants thereof. That's less important to me than what are we doing to move the defenders about, what are we doing to find the spaces, what are we doing to manipulate the ball into dangerous areas, how are we doing that? That's really for me, will be the fascinating aspect of this. I mean, I think what James said about Hatate in a deeper role, I can see that having a lot of utility, especially where you're heavy on possession. What does McGregor do whilst Hatate is playing that role? I don't know, because again, you want players to be trying to affect the play further up the pitch, as many of them as possible, sort of thing. So yeah, I think it's just hugely, as I say, having a bit of fun, really, sort of throwing around a few controversial thoughts to begin the show on. But I genuinely do think it'll be fascinating to see what we end up with as a starting lineup, first of all, because listen, Rodgers is, as you rightly say, it's been kind of quite quiet and just quite calm, and just business has been getting on with. But Rodgers has got an ego, and he's going to want to make his mark. And I think tomorrow we'll see a little bit of that in terms of who we'll see some hints really as to who's really is going to be in the plans going forward, and who might not actually be as important as perhaps we thought they were. I do think there'll be a couple of surprises.
Yeah, and when I say the 4-2-3-1 with the 2 pivots, if you watch the games back from Japan, very fluid, very rotational, with one or the other, often McGregor making the runs from deep, but in possession in the final third, also Hatate, which again I think suits him, making those runs from deep. But it's not this static that 2 guys standing there and distributing like Pirlo or something. It's far more dynamic with that, the interchanging, the overloads, and the rotation. But why I found it noticeable is that within that context, Hatate was the deepest one, almost like the 1 and 1A. 1 is Hatate deep, 1A is McGregor deep. So on balance with the rotations, it was Hatate being the one more so than not collecting the ball, with McGregor being the next kind of link. And that would be completely, that's a very different role than what he played under Postecoglou, where if he was involved, it was more so stretched, more in that wide role to connect with the inverted fullbacks when you think about the triangles in ball progression. So yeah, I just wanted to stress it's not this like rigid. It's been very dynamic, actually, the way that they were when they did play that way with McGregor and Hatate. So I actually found it kind of exciting. I mean, I think that role suits Hatate from a risk reward perspective. Again, there's still a risk. There's still that left tail on the risk side with some of his decision making, but to me that suits him better than the attacking 8 role, particularly against better teams.
I'm going to make a slight prediction for how we're going to play, and I'm going to adjust my glasses because it's going to make me sound very intelligent altogether. It's something that is in fashion right now, and I think it's something that Rodgers is going to try with Celtic, and that's the box midfield. I think we're going to see that a little bit with, like you're saying, Hatate playing a little bit deeper, and whether it's Matt O'Reilly or David Turnbull, whoever is as a number 10 is going to be pulled wider of the normal number 10 slot in the middle, and I think Kyogo is going to fall back in with Abada and Maeda providing the width going forward for balls in behind, coming inside, getting in behind the defense. I think that's something that we will see Celtic experiment with. Might be a different variation to what I'm saying in terms of the personnel and the players and how it looks. Sometimes it's played with full backs as opposed to 4 midfielders and a striker. So that's my prediction for the general shape. I think look out for a box midfield at some point tomorrow against Ross County, because Rodgers has done that with Leicester, and he did it previously with Liverpool back as far as 2012. So anybody who wants to tell you the box midfield is a new thing that Arteta invented in the last year, they're lying, because it's been around for a long time. It just hasn't been given a mainstream name. So just that's something to look out for. In terms of the game tomorrow, we will get predictions. Don't worry, the predictions are back. They will be coming at the end of the podcast, but we'll leave you in suspense for them, because I want to talk about signings and where Celtic are at going into the season as a whole, because I feel like, along with myself, there's a general feeling of, I'm not going to say negativity, but maybe just angst or nervousness going into the season. A lot of it seems to be based around the transfer window. Seeing a lot of negativity around the transfer window. A lot of people think Celtic are definitely not prepared. If Starfelt leaves, they definitely feel that Celtic are not prepared for the season going ahead. So, I mean, this is Celtic's transfer window so far. So they've got Nawrocki, they've got Odin Thiago Home, Hyun Hyun Yang, Marco Tilio, Hyuk Hyo Hwan, Awada signed on a permanent basis. And Jota has obviously left the club, so one major departure from the club this season. Are we happy with that business so far? Rodgers has hinted at more incoming, so he was speaking ahead of the game or after the preseason games. I can't remember where this was from, but he basically said that he came in, they were given time to assess. There's definitely clear priorities in terms of positions that they're going to look at, and over time they're going to look to improve the squad further. And he says now is the best time to do it. So it definitely seems like Celtic are still in the market for players, and as we know, these bigger deals take longer to get over the line. So if there is big signings coming in, they're going to be done in the next couple of weeks before the window closes, as opposed to them happening 3 months ago. So are we happy with that? Are we happy with the way that Celtic have done their business this summer?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not disappointed. I think we're being true to strategy, really. The more sort of projecty, obscure sort of youth signings that we hope to, younger players, I guess, that we want to develop. The sort of cheaper end of the scale have been identified early, been tracked for quite a long time, and they've been brought in. I think Nawrocki is probably the exception to that. He's clearly at that price point, and where he's come from, he'll be a well-known, well-scouted entity and earmarked for immediate involvement in the first team, I would imagine. But the others, well, Awata obviously was a bit of an exception, but the other three, I think, will they'll be given time to bed in and integrate, and they're very young players. You know, I I come back to hopefully trying to be consistent here. Of we just it doesn't matter whether it's 4-3-3, box midfield, Postecoglou, Rodgers. It doesn't matter, right? We need better players to compete in the Champions League. I keep saying it. And it's not as simple as that. Just having better players won't make us necessarily competitive. You've got to have system plus personnel. It's not system or personnel. We saw last season that very strong system with decent personnel. There's a ceiling there that you just ain't going to break through at Champions League level. I think in reality it should have got us third place based on the performances, but it didn't. But I don't think we're any further forward in that regard. And as I say, the only way that we're going to get further forward is finding a way to upskill the actual quality in the squad. Easier said, easy to say, very difficult to do. it does mean that we are a relatively cash-rich football club, probably one of the more cash-rich football clubs in Europe these days. That doesn't mean to say we're going to spend millions on individual transfers. You tend to spend more money on wages over the duration, as we've said before, and the more money you spend on transfers, the more money you will spend on wages, etc. But I still think there's going to be a lot of business done. Personally, I think there'll still be some significant incomings that are being worked on, and I still think there might be a couple exits that whether we like Starfelt, whether people expect that or not, I don't know, but there could be a couple of significant exits as well. So I think there's a lot still to do. When we're a month out from the end of the transfer window closing, we've got a bit of leeway until Champions League matches start, so no panic in that regard. We've clearly identified, I think we could all identify probably very similar areas that we need to strengthen. Rodgers himself has talked about 2 to 3 areas to strengthen. I presume if we lose some key players like Starfelt, that will mean additional recruitment is needed. So yeah, absolutely. But is it enough? Have we got enough in the squad to see us through the next 4 games, 1 game a week? I would hope that we have. So no panic in that regard. And just as I say, I think I suspect, and it's just a guess really in my part, that the market that we're trying to operate in, the type of players that we're trying to get hold of, these deals are not done quickly necessarily, because they're probably players that do have some demand around them. There's probably quite a lot of commitment and money. There's probably complex negotiations with all sorts of parties to be had, etc. Would you be happier knowing that the club is well run, good scouting department, which is what Rodgers has said, all the infrastructure is in place? Things might not be moving as fast as we all want. Would you rather that, or would you rather be operating in the unwanteds and bargain basement, where you can get all your deals done at the beginning of August because nobody else wants the players? Where would you want to be? I know where I'd want to be, right? I think we're operating consistently within strategy. If we don't bring in those 3 first teams kind of levels players that raise the overall quality of the team by in a month's time, I'll probably have a different viewpoint, because then the evidence will have changed, and therefore I will change my opinion.
What about you, James?
Yeah, so I try to think about it. Are we better than we were this time last year? And that's not as simple as, are the players better? I think I agree with Alan. We need to improve generally the quality in the squad to kind of reach our aspirations. Injuries are a part of that. When Johnston gets back, that's going to be a material difference, obviously. Telio, one of the signings, is going to be out still for some time, apparently. So that has to factor in as well. But as far as the transfers go so far, I would say that if we don't make those material signings, or if the material signings aren't of a quality and a fit, then we will not be better than we were this time last season. And that's a big problem. That would be I would think, I would deem that a significant failure. And now the flip side of that's kind of the talent side of it. I'm encouraged on Rodgers' arrival and him being able to maybe get more out of certain players. We talked about that last week relative to maybe some personality fit, where he might, resonate better with some players. We've talked about Bernabe maybe being a better fit for a Rodgers fullback position, potentially, the traditional Tierney type bombing on, versus Bernabe never made any sense for the Greg Taylor-esque inverted role under Ange Ball. That just was kind of mystifying to begin with. So I think there are some potential improvements in there from a utilization perspective. Those won't all be good. I mean, and I'm still skeptical about our strikers outside of, well, just generally our strikers dropping into midfield. I'm not sure that's a great idea. We'll see. The more and more I've been thinking and analyzing that question, I wonder how much that's a good idea, just structurally. So at this point, I think we need it, and this is always the least popular topic to get into, but I had some fun this week posting on the Rangers transfer window so far, and I've done my little benchmarking exercise with their window, and I think they're better. I think they are better than where they were this time last season. And I think the big part of that is because two of their uh, biggest players with biggest wages that should have been top performers for them were not good last year in Kent and Morelos. So they were almost like empty shirts to a degree. So if they just replace them with like quality of people who are motivated, and I don't mean exactly the same, but uh, players of a similar quality that are motivated to perform and maybe want to be there, that in and of itself is a material shift. And they addressed a huge black hole going into last season that turned into a disaster for them, which was a geriatric goalkeeper who had a train wreck of a season. And Butlin's not likely to be that. Who knows? Maybe he's not a world beater, but he's not going to be that bad. Like one of the worst keepers in the world, which is what McGregor was statistically last season. So it's going to be hard for them to get worse than one of the worst in the world, right? So if you kind of look at baseline, I think and again, these are all probability distributions. You never know. I think they're probably going to be better domestically than they were last season. I think at this point, if I'm going to argue, we're at best case the same, maybe a little worse. Jota is a huge loss. I mean, I don't think we can, you don't sell a player for 25 million who Alan's documented that's one of our players that did hold up pretty well in the Champions League. Losing that player is a big deal. So I think we need these last 2-3 signings, like whatever they're going to be. And I'm hopeful of that. Like that's my expectation. That's my hope. I think it makes sense with Rodgers coming in, and I cannot conceive of a situation where the talk was Ange is going to get 30 million, and then this is the window that we end up with, and Scott Bain starting at keeper and go. I mean, you got to be kidding me. Like they're going to have. They're going to have a support that may not be in the best of mood. Which is another thing I put out, is that, again, nothing conspiratorial. This just happens to be a season where the fixture rounds line up that ours are tougher in the first round. Like we're away to the teams that are more likely to give us issues. We're at Ibrox, we're at Pittodrie, we're at Livingston, we're at Hibs, we're at Hearts, right? And their Rangers are all home to all of those teams. So, I could see a scenario where if our window isn't materially improved from here, where there could be some nervous people within the first 8 weeks of the season. And I'd be one of them, quite frankly, because I think we need to get better. And I think Rangers have gotten better. And, I think we will. Like that's not to be alarmist. I think, if we sign 2 or 3 Carter Vickers, Jota level type talents, which I think we will, and one of them's a keeper, then that's a game changer. Like that all of a sudden completely changes the competitive dynamics on what we could, I think, reasonably look forward to for the season.
All that considered, and I'm going to put context to what I'm saying. I do think Celtic will make more signings, but let's just imagine a world where Celtic don't make more signings. I don't think it's been a bad window per se. If you look at the signings that Celtic have made, firstly, so you've got Nawrocki, 22 years old, Odin Thiago Holm, 20 years old, Yang is 21, Telio 21, Juan is 22. That's a significant drop in the average level or age profile of Celtic if you include Abada's age, Matt O'Reilly's age, Hitate's relative age. You've got quite a young and up-and-coming squad there in terms of, firstly, durability to new ideas and management styles and tactics, but also sell on value in terms of the actual financing and the way that Celtic do business going forward. It's much better to be buying a 20-year-old and developing him than buying a 26-year-old that you can't sell on. Secondly, you have to take into account the money that Celtic have spent nailing down Kyogo to a new deal, Maeda to a new deal, McGregor to a new deal. That's huge. And then if you cast your mind back to last summer when Celtic didn't do much business, they essentially just nailed down a few names. They got Jota on a permanent basis, Cameron Carter-Vickers on a permanent basis, and Celtic were basically accused of standing still and doing nothing, and they were better the following year. They were better last year overall. I know it petered out a little bit, and there was injuries, and you had to deal with different things. And Champions League sort of put a little bit of a dent in the season. But Celtic won the treble last year, having been accused of standing still in the summer transfer window. I think there's scope for development and improvement from players, and even seeing new things from players like Kyogo, I think will be very interesting to watch. I think Matt O'Reilly is going to be excellent. I think Hatate is going to have a phenomenal season under Rodgers. Abada, like we said, has a chance to prove himself again at first team level. Maida will be given a different role that might play to his strengths more than being an on the ball winger. And get more goals potentially. Heart is still a weak point. I will say that goalkeeping is definitely something that worries me. But overall, compared to last season, I don't think Celtic have had a bad transfer window overall. I think it's been pretty decent. And then you add in the context that the likelihood is Celtic are going to buy another player, if not another 2 players, still got money in the bank, have invested in the future, have a new coach, have a new coaching system. Everything's sort of a little bit more calm and in place. I think I'm pretty satisfied, to be honest, with the summer.
So,
Well, I think there. Well, I'll be quick, Alan. I think there's quantity over quality is one thing. That's a question. I'm not saying, I do my analysis and I have some concerns in that regard. Let's put it that way. I won't get into it deep. But the other side of that, I mean, it's to your point, and you said it, we didn't do that much last summer. We didn't have to a degree, but we also didn't make any big sales. So again, you got to think about this from the perspective of how the clubs typically run. So, we have made a big sale this summer. So that's part of this balancing. And this is where I go back to kind of just, is the starting 11 better? That's the first thing. This is where I got into huge trouble on Twitter in October of 2020. When I put out a thread basically at this point, and this is the fun part, right? At that point, I got accused of being effectively a heretic for saying that the Ajeti, Laxall, Duffy, and Barkas window had not substantially improved our starting 11 from the prior season, right? So that was basically the thread I put out. I'm kind of in the same place right now, which is I'm not saying that the players are going to be similar. That's not the point. It's that season over season. I don't think our starting 11 has been impacted yet from the transfer window. I think there's some players there that might be in the future, potentially really valuable. Holm in particular, I'm very encouraged about.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the way I'm thinking. And this is within the context of this goes back to what Alan said. And I lied. I wasn't gonna be that brief. Clearly that our starting 11 weren't good enough for Champions League level. So that's kind of my sequencing here is.
Yeah. I would agree with you on the starting 11 point. I do overall. But on the Champions League point, it's actually a point that I meant to touch on. I don't think if Celtic went out and spend all of the money that they could, every single cent of that Jota money, I don't think they'd be able to significantly make a dent in the Champions League. I think that's fanciful thinking that in one transfer window, Celtic could go out and get two players that would, instantly change their stature within the Champions League. I think it's about making inroads within the Europa League at this point in time is where Celtic should be looking at. Look, finish third in the Champions League. That is something that should be a priority. Get into the Europa League. I think you give it a good go. But I think you can make those inroads without buying new players. I think it's a relatively new thing that the transfer window has become such an obsession for fans all across the globe in the Premier League and Celtic and everywhere else. The idea of having players and developing and improving those players seems to be something that has disappeared entirely, that just because you have the same starting 11 as last year that you can't have improved, because I think you can. And I think the money that Celtic are working with at the minute in terms of where they can make improvements, I think they've set aside probably the foundations for improvement next year, which I know a lot of people won't be happy with, but that's how I think. Alan, you were going to come in there at the start there. Sorry.
I think you make a good point, and I would agree with that. I mean, last year we had a coach who, if you almost give him any set of players, he will so not rigidly, it's not the right word, but he will so emphatically implement a system of play that there will some high level of effectiveness will emerge from that, almost without making too many transfers. Similarly with Rodgers, I think we've got, as I say, and I think we've got an elite coach, as in we've got an elite person on the training ground to work with players, both as a man manager and as a technician, as a developer of talent, that he will make players that we already have better players. I do believe that, and that's what I'm actually most excited to see. I'm not clamoring for more signings for the sake of it. And I agree with you that I think the signings that we have made are all developable. They're all young enough to be further developed, etc. Whether that's for profit or what have you, wait and see. But all of those things I'm completely sanguine about and very happy with. And as I say, so I'm not too concerned about the first sort of month of the season, if rest of October really, if there's not too many new faces. It's just that, and I also agree with you about we could spend £100 million on players, frankly, and still finish bottom of the Champions League group, right? And nobody wants to do that. I agree with you. Actually, I think we should just enough to try and get that third spot. Second as a bonus, and then try and make a run at it. That's what I'm looking for. But yeah, absolutely, I'm looking at Rodgers as somebody who he's paid a lot of money. He makes a difference to make those players better, and he also comes up with systems of play that make the team better. But the only thing I would say that sits around that is, I come back to the conversation. I remind you of the point that I made when we were looking for when Ange left, which is that at the end of the season, the winners of the league go into the Champions League next season, and the bounty for that getting into the Champions League next season is significantly larger than this season. And it's always, and unfortunately, the nature of Scottish football, it's not just a case of do you want your club to have that bounty, is you don't want the other lot to have it. That's just the absolute truth of it, right? And what they've done is they've gone all in again on relatively experienced players, on probably very quite physical players as well. Listen, what James has said, I didn't necessarily disagree with a lot of it, but I think for balance, we should say that equally, we all know, right? If you go back over the last 10 years at Celtic, if you buy 10 players, right, how many of those 10 players are going to be a success? It's not. The answer is not going to be 10, right? So of all the players they've bought, are they all going to be a success? No, they're not. In fact, some of them will be an absolute disaster. Two or three of them, if they're lucky, might turn out to be really good. And that's not because of them. That's because that's just the nature of how these things tend to play out. They've also got to gel together. You've got to come up with a system of play. You've got to integrate the existing players. All of those things come into it as well. And remember, these players, are hopefully not the market that Celtic are operating in. 4 of those players effectively were free transfers. They were not wanted. And as far as I'm aware, there wasn't a clamour from other clubs to sign them, right? There wasn't a huge queue of people fighting over these players. Lammers is a distressed buy. He was bought at 11 million. He's sold at 3.5. Sema doesn't even have a buy clause. Brighton are happy just to write the guy off, right? Dessers, they were happy to get rid of Danilo. Feyenoord were very happy to get rid of because potentially issues not to do with football. James will know more about Cifuentes. He seems like a decent player, but again, I don't recall there being a queue of clubs, waiting to sign a guy. So, let's be balanced about it. Yes, I think they'll be stronger, they'll be physically stronger. I absolutely agree that having, even if Dessers and whatever Lammers are not as high a quality of player as Kent and Morelos, simply the fact that they'll be trying their hearts out means there'll be better players on day one. Absolutely, for sure, that will be the case. But it's not a given they'll all blend. It's not a given they'll form a coherent system, and as I say, it's not a given that they'll all turn out to be successes. But they've gone all in. They've gone all in again, and they're not doing it in the way that we're doing it, which is bring in young players, develop them, sustainability. This is like buy peak age players with virtually no resale value, pay them high wages, and hope it all works out for the best in the Champions League. We've seen this story before, Okay, so what we wanted to make sure is that is a really miserable story at the end of the day. That's what we need to try and do. And to
Yeah.
James's point, it does come down to we do need a better goalkeeper. We do need a better left back. We do need more energy in midfield. All those things are still true. And if they're not addressed by the end of the window, that's not throwing the toys out the pram. That's not entitlement. That's just simply, improving that starting 11.
And it's uncharted territory for Mickey Beale as well, because this will be his first time ever reaching a point of over a year with the same club in terms of his head coaching. So how he deals with that, and how he deals with the pressure of, this is my team. I've had a full window with these guys. I've had a full preseason.
Sorry to
And
interrupt you, and which must-win game has Mickey won? Not a single one,
yeah,
right? So there's that, as a buddy pointed out to me today.
yeah. One final point I'll make on the transfer window, because I think it's an important one, and you sort of alluded to it there. And it's not often thought in this way, but I think it should be. We should be considering Brendan Rodgers as a new signing, because what Celtic have essentially done there is they've sold an elite coach to Tottenham and replaced the elite coach with another elite coach. It would have been so easy for Celtic to take a budget option there and go for someone new, go for someone risky, but they went for the big name, the name that was probably going to splinter the fan groups. They weren't afraid to do that, and that should be something that should be considered when we're looking at the money that Celtic have spent, that some of that is actually going into Brendan Rodgers as well, and it's well worth putting that investment into the manager as well. So that's my final point that I'll make on the transfer window. We are edging up to the hour mark, so we might just move on to our predictions. I'm not going to make you predict the season, because I can't predict how tomorrow is going to go, and let alone how the entire season is going to pan out. So I guess if you could give me, like, maybe your overall prediction for the season in terms of how you think Celtic are going to do, not title wise, but in terms of, like, are they going to be better than last year, or middling, player that you think might surprise us, and then a prediction for tomorrow. So, James, do you want to go first?
I would be content if we won the league and one cup. I think that would be fine with me. I mean, trebles are obviously, again, we've been spoiled with trebles, but I think given the competitive dynamics, even just winning the league would be, for the competitive reasons that Alan cited. I mean, how important it is heading into next season. That I think is of paramount importance, and I would be satisfied with that. And then progress in Europe. I mean, some of that, there's so much of this is part of what I've spent quite a bit of time on the analytics side, is documenting how much is uncontrolled risk. And that goes back to my career track record in financial markets. It's part of the analytics space there, which one of the ones that is, again, I haven't seen anyone else look at this, and I've harped on it a couple of times, is that there was almost a 1-goal swing per game on average between Celtic and Rangers last season, off of the quality of opposition keeper shot stopping. Okay. That is nuts. Like, it's a weird outlier. Like, Celtic just statistically had and this is playing the same teams and for the most part the same keepers, right? That just the distribution, the way it worked out last season, is that opposition keepers were horrible against us and materially less horrible against Rangers. And in past seasons, that has flipped at times. I mean, it's just normal, kind of variance. So some of the stuff we can't control. We can't control what the Champions League draw is going to be. I mean, there are versions of our draw that are going to be an absolute freaking nightmare, which will be good to finish fourth and be competitive. Whereas there's others Champions League draws where I think we could reasonably have a shot at second in a really positive, like if we do really well with our signings for the end of the window. So to me, contextually, material improvement in Europe. That's not a rigid, like, I know it's a wishy-washy thing, but depending on our draw, that could mean a competitive fourth, or it could mean fighting for second. But if we see that there's, significant improvement. That's what I want to see. I think we have a really good chance at both of those. So I'm reasonably optimistic with those, that kind of context.
Alan?
You have to win the league. It's as simple as that. In some ways, if Celtic win the league this year, it'll almost ruin Scottish football because I think the league will become incredibly uncompetitive. Seriously, for years. That's how big it is.
Yeah.
But
People who
this is
aren't
again.
fans of the Scottish League will laugh at you saying that the Scottish League isn't already uncompetitive.
Well, no, I know, but even more so, right? Because it's that it could be that transformational in terms of Celtic's ability to grow, and I'm talking about grow in relative to European benchmarks, not Scottish benchmarks. So for me, the league is everything. We have to win the league. I don't almost say don't care about the cups, but as long as we win the league, I'll be very happy. I want to see progress in Europe. I want to see a better um, problem solving in those European games, such that we can compete better. Um, to me, any European football after Christmas is a win, really. So that those are the two goals I'm looking for: the league, and then some kind of European football after Christmas. In terms of who could be the surprise of the season, I think you asked. As I say, I think this could be a really big season for Abada. I really do. I think he's now got a manager that I think appreciates his talents, and he's a capable player that will fit well within Rodgers' team. And I think he's a player that actually, despite being used mainly as a sub, has continued to kind of grow as a player. And I think he's got a huge ceiling. So I think he's the one that I'm really excited about. Going to have a big season.
No. I will go with, I think winning the league, I agree with you, is a absolute number one priority. I want to win a game in the Champions League. I'm aware that's easier to say than to actually do. I'd like to win a game in the Champions League and win a knockout game in Europe. So that's my overarching idea of what I would consider a success for Celtic this year. I think Matt O'Reilly is definitely going to be someone who improves under Rodgers. He's right up Rodgers' alley in terms of the midfielders that he likes. And Maida, I think Maida's going to score a bucket load of goals this season, the way that he's going to be played for Rodgers. So that's my predictions for this season. What about predictions for tomorrow then? This is the hardest game in the world to predict at the minute because we don't know who's going to play. So have at it.
Yeah, I didn't mention a player. I apologize. I was going to go with O'Reilly as well, but I think Abada is a good shout as well. I mean, it should be like a 4-5-6-0 type of game. I mean, that's my expectation. Rodgers is going to want to come out, you know, out of the gates fast, and going to this once a week. And like I said, Ross County tends not to be the more cynical bunkering type, even at Celtic Park. So there should be enough space and quality that we should just blow them away. So yeah, that's outside of a set piece. I hopefully a clean sheet, but it's one of the what has become enjoyable flag days where we run up a score that's a fun one.
Alan, do you want to make a prediction?
Well, I was on the Celtic Way bulletin and I had to make a prediction, so I look a bit silly if I don't. Well, not that it's probably a zero overlap of people that watch both. Maybe I don't know, but I think I said 2-0, a sort of solid win. But really, for me, nothing against Joe Hart. He's a lovely guy, and I think he's been great for 2 seasons. But I'm kind of hoping that Rodgers is bold. And also if that means that we're looking for a top class goalkeeper in the market, that's even better. I'm really excited about. I'm actually more excited about seeing some of the players like O'Reilly, like Abada, Hatate, Bernabe, who to see how much Rodgers can start to get them playing, and Maida even improving. Really, I think that's going to be the most exciting aspect of it. I think the newer and younger players, they'll bed in gradually. I think I wouldn't expect too much from them initially. So yeah, that's what I'm really excited to see. I think we'll get a solid win tomorrow. I hope. As you say, but it's more about, again, it's always with me. It's always the performance. I'm really excited to see how we set up and how we play. I think it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, same here. I think it's going to be a solid win. I'm going to go with a 3-0 win. I think it's
You
going
guys
to
are
be.
wimps.
Yeah, I think it's going to
You
be
guys
a
are wimps.
pretty good performance from Celtic. Probably a surprisingly good performance from Celtic. I hope so. I really hope so, because if it starts with if it starts like the Hearts game for Ange, it's just gonna really
No way. No way.
start as a worry for
Who's
Celtic
on
fans going
who's on
forward. But
VAR tomorrow? That's what we have to ask.
Oh, yeah.
No comment.
yeah, we haven't we haven't spent the last 40 minutes talking about referees. I really missed that. So get ready for the season ahead. Can't wait. Right, that's where we'll park the show for this week. We will be reviewing this game, back with the reviews as of next week. If you're new to the channel and you've just come across the show, be sure to hit the subscribe button to get all the podcasts across the season. If you want to get the podcasts across the season, they are on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We're at Huddle Breakdown on Twitter if you want to follow us. And if you want to get involved in the conversation, leave a comment below and get the predictions coming in for the season ahead and for the game tomorrow. Cheers, Alan. Thanks, James. We will chat to you next week when we'll be reviewing Celtic against Ross County. Until then, good luck.